Let's talk about the state of retro gaming in 2025. As we approach 2026, there's been a lot of things happened this year and a lot of big surprises, but I think it's fair to say that retro gaming has continued just to get bigger and bigger over time. A lot of people are turning away from modern gaming for different reasons. People don't like the ever increasing cost of modern hardware and accessories and the cost of video games. They're unhappy about the lack of ownership when it comes to modern video games these days, and just kind of all the different hoops that you have to jump through in order to play modern games. It's just easier to turn on the classics and play some old retro games without any fuss. And of course, that nostalgia of playing games on older systems is simply unrivaled. I think some of the very best games came out on older retro systems, and we definitely need to celebrate those things. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the really cool things that I've seen in retro in 2025. Now, the first thing that I do want to talk about is game collecting. Now, game collecting is continuing to just kind of get bigger and bigger as time goes on. I think this year, I didn't go to any retro conventions, but I did kind of talk to some friends of mine and watched various videos. And it seemed like a lot of people are going back to conventions and looking for those deals and looking to kind of complete their collections. Now, N64 and PS1 are definitely the hot items right now. And there's no real coincidence that we have recreation items available for both in the form of the analog 3D and the soon-to-be-released Mod Retro, which is, I guess it's going to come out at some point early next year. Hopefully, we'll hear more about that. So all of a sudden, those types of systems, that generation is really what a lot of collectors are looking at in order to kind of shore up their collections for those particular systems. Now, for me, the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 are really the sweet spot for game collecting right now. And when I mean sweet spot, I'm talking about, being able to buy games for that generation, and it doesn't really break the bank, and it's kind of the calm before the storm, if you will. And again, it's no coincidence that both the Xbox 360 now and the PS3 can easily be jailbroken, which means that being able to buy physical games, you can buy those physical games with a lot of confidence and know that you can still play these games on those particular devices, which, other than the Red Ring of Death issue on the Xbox 360, if you have a slim model, you're not going to have any issues whatsoever. And I might add that emulation of the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 come with their own caveats. Now, on the PS3 with RPCS3, it's an exceptional emulator with a good level of compatibility, but you need a pretty fast machine in order to run these games well. And on the Xbox 360 with Xenia, unfortunately, the emulation is still not quite there. It works okay for the most part, but a lot of games have a lot of graphical issues. So really, these games are tied to the architecture and those particular hardware ecosystems. And I think that's one of the reasons why these games aren't that expensive, because you can get an Xbox 360 pretty cheap, you can get a PS3 pretty cheap, and I think as we approach the 25-year mark for these systems, we're just past the 20-year mark, the price of these games is going to be a lot higher than what they are now. Now, I'm not a speculation expert. I'm definitely not a game collector. I'm someone that kind of got out of game collecting, as a serious thing many, many years ago. But that's just the way things seem to be. The last thing that I actually bought from a game collecting perspective was The Settlers 2. Now, this was a release that came out on the Commodore Amiga officially as a game that was released by Ubisoft and Bug Byte. But the game was finally released and released on the Commodore Amiga, which is really cool. And of course, it came on a big box and I was able to pick up a copy myself. So I'm very happy to kind of collect these types of things and really support these types of, ventures that happen. But otherwise, I'm not really someone that is like going to retro game stores these days anymore and just buying up physical games for the sake of, having the biggest collection. And while I'm on the topic of that, I don't really see a lot of people doing video game room tours anymore. That was really a big thing kind of pre-pandemic. A lot of people did videos of their game rooms and kind of showing off what they had in their collection and their rare pieces and their systems. I don't really see that as much anymore these days. And maybe you can tell me why. You guys can tell me why you think that is. Is it really just because it's not really interesting content anymore? Or do you think it has to do with the fact that people aren't really, wanting to show off what they have, or maybe they've sold off their collections? For me, I personally got rid of a lot of my games. I still have, video games, of course, as you can see around in the background around me here, but I don't really tend to collect video games as much as I used to. Now, I think for me, if there's one particular aspect of retro gaming that has seen significant improvement and significant growth in 2025, it's these recreation systems and FPGA devices. Now, I did touch on the analog 3D, and of course, I did cover it on a previous episode on my channel, so check that out if you haven't already. And these types of devices, these FPGA devices, but not exclusively FPGA. Let's be very clear. A lot of these recreation devices as well are really starting to become extremely popular right now. And these are a really good way for people to kind of relive their childhood memories and relive that nostalgia, which can be done in a very modern fashion, which means that they can just simply connect these devices up to modern televisions. They usually will have some type of wireless controllers for convenience, and much of the time they will accept original game cartridges as well. So this year we've seen, obviously, the Analog 3D, the announcement of the Mod Retro M64, which I think is going to be a very interesting device when that does come out. It's probably obviously going to come out in 2026, but we have seen information about that. We've seen a live demo of that at various trade shows, and that does look very interesting. So all of a sudden, Nintendo 64 is extremely popular right now. It's very, very hot right now. The other thing, obviously, is the Takayudon Superstation, the PlayStation 1 device, which I also believe has an optional add-on optical drive where you can just insert original PS1 discs and play games. If you have a library of PlayStation 1 games, that this device will support it. But this particular device is not specifically tied to PS1. It's an all-in-one device that is essentially something that you can just load other FPGA MR cores on and run pretty much any type of system that the MR FPGA supports anyway. Now, another FPGA device that was announced this year that hopefully will be on my test bench here in the next couple of weeks is the Commodore 64 Ultimate. So this is the original C64 that has been revived in FPGA form. And this is interesting because it recreates the entire motherboard with the same port. So you have the cartridge port, you have the cassette port, the disk drive ports, and it allows you to play all your original Commodore 64 games, but it does so in a much more modern fashion. There is obviously Wi-Fi and USB ports, and it also comes with an updated keyboard, but it also retains that feeling of the original C64 with its original beige color, the kind of bread box or the bread bin color that people so lovingly talk about. Now, this particular device is something that I've kind of had my eye on for a while, and I've just kind of been on the fence about getting one, but I think I'm a believer now. I'm going to jump on board and see what this system is all about. I own a Commodore 64, and the thought of me, hooking up my old C64 with my old power brick and trying to find all my old cables and then plug in my disk drive, which has its own power supply, and my tape drive, and kind of just trying to set everything up is something that I just don't want to lose an afternoon doing. With a device like this, you have one device where you can plug into any modern display and enjoy, C64 games extremely fast. And this is really something that I think is appealing to a lot of old Commodore 64 fans. They want to relive those memories of playing C64 games. But not only this, there is a very active homebrew community that's continuing to develop and bring out new games for the C64. But it's not just the C64. There is a lot of different homebrew coming out for various systems, including things like ROM hacks as well. And this is another aspect of retro gaming that I think is just getting more and more popular over time. And then, of course, we have the more traditional recreation devices. We've seen Atari release their 2600 Plus, the 7800 Plus. The A1200 is a very interesting recreation computer, which is essentially an emulated version of the Amiga 1200 with built-in games, and effectively is recreating that Amiga 1200 experience that you got the day that you got your Amiga 1200 back in 1991 and opened it up for, for the holidays. So having a recreated Amiga 1200, a system which I might add was not only not very popular at the time, but more importantly, it's extremely expensive to buy. Like buying a Amiga 1200, a used Amiga 1200 on eBay is not cheap. It's very cost prohibitive in terms of the amount of money that you're going to put into a device like this just to play some old Amiga games. So this device will definitely kind of, scratch that itch for a lot of people. And I think it can be expanded and, loaded up with, side loaded up with various other things. So this will get the job done for a lot of people. And again, this is something that I'm interested in. I pre-ordered one of these, and I'll definitely be checking this out as well on the channel when the time comes. I believe they come out next year. And of course, we've got companies like Evercade that are continuing to bring out various devices, and they're continuing to license and re-release physical games from, classic games. And one of the games that they just announced was the Turrican Collection, which is something that I'm very much interested in. And this is really all it takes, right, to get, you hooked on a particular, type of old recreation system or an old, retro system. In the case of Evercade, it's effectively their own creation. It's not recreating anything, but it's just a hardware platform that accepts physical products that allows you to play old retro games that are curated to the games that they license. And this is very interesting because, they could go like a couple of years without really you even being thinking about them. And then all of a sudden they can announce your favorite game series like the Duke Nukem Collection or the Turrican games. And all of a sudden, you're thinking to yourself, aha, I need to get my hands on one of those Evercade devices. And that's all it really takes to get you invested into that ecosystem. And then once you do, you realize that there is a massive library of physical games they've already released for their system. So you start to kind of, dabble and look into the potential of buying more. So, systems like the Evercade are doing extremely well right now, and I think they're just continuing to get bigger and bigger over time. This year, we've seen a huge surge in the popularity of retro handhelds. Now, retro handhelds just continue to iterate and just kind of get better. And the thing that I really am seeing in 2025 is that the retro handhelds are really being tailored for a specific type of use case. And we're starting to see very, very small, compact, and cheaper, but quite powerful retro handhelds hit the market. And coupled with things like retro achievements, which is also something that is, has become extremely popular, it really is a great time for retro enthusiasts to kind of jump in and buy your own kind of handheld device. There's so many out there on the market. It's almost becoming very difficult to keep up with all the announcements that I seem to, see on my timeline almost every week. But right now, the system that everyone's talking about is the Neo Thor, the dual screen device, which basically looks like a modern Nintendo DS Lite. And I think that is something that a lot of people are very interested in. Now, of course, the Steam Deck is still a very popular device for retro gaming, and I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. In fact, the Steam Deck has seen, price drops as well. So getting a Steam Deck now is probably a good move if you're looking at a handheld device to play retro games. The other thing about these retro handhelds is that Android emulation, which is the majority of what these devices are running on, is getting better as well. And that's one area that I kind of talked about in my best emulators of 2025 video. But Android emulation is now at a point where I think it's really, really solid, to the point where I can categorically say I'm confident in buying any type of Android device as long as it's powerful enough to take care of the majority of my emulation needs. One of the things about emulation that I'm seeing in 2025 is that it's just not good enough anymore just to have a stock emulated version of a game running. I think a lot of people are looking for those enhancements, whether that is uncapping frame rates to make them run faster or run smoother, or increasing the resolutions of the games to make them look better, or maybe a combination of both, or replacing soundtracks, just being able to add functionality, add value to older games, and to kind of breathe new life into these games. A lot of emulators are doing these types of things. They're making them look better. They're making them run faster, making them run at frame rates they were never intended to run at. Now, in some instances, that has side effects and it may not work necessarily the right way, but also things like, widescreen hacks and various other ROM hacks that I'm seeing. There's a lot of things going on in the community right now. There are a lot of people actively working on emulation projects, but there's also the ROM hackers that are doing all sorts of different and interesting things to games to make them look better and make them run better, even on stock hardware. It's a very incredible time to be a part of the retro community. There's also the various impossible ports, if you will, or the various ports to, different consoles and different computers. We saw the Super Mario 64 running on the PlayStation 1 just a couple of weeks ago. Look, this may seem like a bit of a joke right now, but think about it. We've got Mario 64 running on a PlayStation 1. I think back in the day, there was these big console war arguments and things that I read saying that there was no way it was possible to run Mario 64 on a PlayStation because the way that the PlayStation 1 handles 3D. Now, I'm not saying that this is a one-to-one replication of that, but it's a good first step. It's a good proof of concept. And I think with more work and more polish, this could prove the naysayers wrong, that Mario 64 was never possible on the PlayStation. And we can see video evidence of this, that it is indeed possible. And these are the types of things that get me really excited about the retro community. There's so many really cool things happening right now. Some standouts for me personally include the Castlevania AGA port running on a stock Amiga 1200. Again, this is something that I would never have imagined was even possible, but here it is running effortlessly on an Amiga, and this is a very incredible thing. I recently just saw a video of a developer known as Reassembler who worked on the Outrun port to the Amiga that is working on a port of Sonic the Hedgehog to the Amiga. These types of things were simply unheard of back in the day because we didn't really have the tools, the documentation, and the knowledge to do these things. Developers back in the day, when they did arcade ports, in many instances, especially on old computers like the Amiga and the Atari ST, did not have any source code, didn't have any reference material. Maybe they had a video cassette of the gameplay itself, or maybe in some instances they had access to an arcade machine, but they certainly didn't have the tools that we have at our disposal today to really kind of hone in and make some incredible things happen. So in conclusion, I'm very excited about the future of retro gaming. 2025 was a massive year for retro, and I think next year is going to be even bigger. There's going to be a lot of things happening, and I'm here for it. I'll definitely be covering a bunch of those things on the channel, of course. As always, if you like this episode, please don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye for now.